Okay. All right, let's get it going. Hi, everyone. Welcome to season 3 of Black.Queer.Alive. My name is Mimi Tempestt, and I am here with Crystal Mason. Hi, Crystal.
Hi.
Before we start, I do have to get, I mess up people's pronouns. I want to make sure I get your pronouns correct. Is it she, her, or they, them?
It is they, them.
Perfect,
And I
perfect.
usually write my pronoun here, but I'm in the wrong account, but this Zoom account will do. This is my work account.
Cool, cool. As long as I get it right,
Uh-huh.
sometimes I like to think that gender expression is something that we get wrong, like initially, but as long as we're open and willing to get it right, then that's the process.
That's what I'm talking about. I mean, because my mama used to always say, you can't blame somebody for not knowing, but you can blame them for not wanting to know, right?
Most definitely that part. All right. Let's see, let's jump into it. So
Okay.
tell me about yourself. We know
Mhm.
your name, but age and occupation. I don't like the question occupation, but what are you passionate about?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I am 59.
Yeah.
Um, and I have lived in the Bay Area, mostly San Francisco, like since 1989.
Hmm.
Excuse me. I had about a 9 year stint in Berlin and then came back here because I love it so much.
Yeah.
And it really never occurred to me to come back to anywhere else. So, that worked out. And yeah, luckily for me, I'm actually the work that I'm doing to make money is also stuff that I'm passionate about. Um, I work for a QT Pop performing arts organization called Queer Rebels.
Mhm.
Um, I'm the co-director there. Queer Rebels is about 12 years old as an organization. It was one of the first here in the Bay that focused exclusively on QT Pop folks, right? So, I've been doing like arts and arts administration for like, I don't know, like 30 years or so, like in all different ways. And most of the time it was like, coming on to like organizations that didn't have any sort of focus, right? And it was always kind of like my passion, and I saw as my job is to get like Black people and other people of color into these spaces,
Mhm.
because for me it's about resources, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Most
And it's about trying to get those resources to people who have been under resourced.
mhm.
And so also like in performance art, there's a history of us
Yeah.
being under resourced, so I always saw that as like my job, right? Anytime I came into any sort of organization where there was any money or any resources to spread around. And like now I've been working for Queer Rebels, I think like almost 3 years now, a little over 3 years maybe. And what's really exciting about that is that, I can actually concentrate on like creating programs and things of this sort, because I don't have to concentrate on getting Black people and other people of color into the organization, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So this has been like really fantastic because I've been able to kind of like, instead of focusing so much on, like I said, trying to, you know, make that space for
Yeah.
us,
Good
I
face.
can actually just be like, we got the space. Now let's concentrate on what we're gonna do with it, right?
Yeah, let's have some fun now.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean it's always fun. I mean, you know what I mean? That's one of the reasons why I do it, because part of my passion is like really making space for
Mhm.
us,
Mhm.
right? And like the first space that I started with a couple of friends is called Lunacy Women's Performance Project.
Mhm.
And you know, and that was a project that was like one of the first like places that like I ran. And I worked with like two white women, but they were both like completely on board, like to the fact, for instance, I was just talking to one of my friends the other day who we
Mhm.
started it with, and we were laughing about how they were talking to someone they work with, a young woman at a museum, and she was saying to them, yeah, you know, back in the day when we had lunacy, we were very clear that we didn't, that people couldn't have all white shows up in our space. You
Wow.
know, we would be all like, you know, they might have got away with it the first time, right? But
Yes.
then we'd be like, there was only white people in your show. And we're not really down for that, right? And you know, and uh, and she was saying like the young woman was all talking about how radical that is, but we was doing that back in the 90s, right?
Right. That I feel like this whole blossoming of, hey, we're gonna create only QT POC spaces, but for like black and POC people. I'm sorry, POC folks. Like I feel like it feels like a new phenomenon, but I feel like that radical tradition has always been there. Like it's always been a thing for us. It
Yeah,
just hasn't been as loud. I don't know. I
right.
mean, that's just my interpretation.
Well, I mean, I think it hasn't been around that much, to be quite
Okay.
honest. Because when I'm talking about, like, our space was not like only uh women of color or
Mhm.
people of color, but I think what we were saying is that, you know, anybody can come here and put on the show,
Got you.
but it can't be all white people in
Got
your show.
got you.
Which is like a little bit different from what I got now, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because, you know, now I don't have to worry about that problem, right? So there, like, that's what I was trying to say, that in this job there's just like a lot of conversations I don't necessarily have to have, that
Mm,
I've had to have in the past, right? You know, like that one about like putting on a show, you know, and like in San Francisco, even in the 90s, and
mhm.
then trying to act like you ain't know no black people you could have invited. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
you know, I mean, for reals, it's like one thing if it's a one person show,
Mhm.
maybe, you know, but you ain't gonna tell me you're gonna have like this lineup of people performing, but you couldn't
That
find
part.
no
Yes.
black people or other people of color.
Mm,
And that's what we were saying. And we were saying, and we're not gonna like really stand for that. You
mm.
know, like I said, we give people a chance, right? But we'd be like, if y'all want to work with us again, y'all gonna have to change that, right? You know, and I
Okay.
feel like we need both of those things, right? We need spaces that are for Black people, for other people of color, for queer people, for women, you
Mm,
know, all of that. But we also have to say in these other spaces, there's no reason in this day and time that
mhm.
anybody should have a panel, a show, a concert, a visual art show, any of that stuff, and it'd be all white people.
Mhm.
Just know, I feel like, you know, there's never been a place for that, and there should never be a place for that,
I got you.
right?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, I agree. I feel like we have the capacity at this stage to create productions or create just spaces where it is all encompassing. Every perspective is important, highlighted, and not one is valued over the other. So I agree with that. Are there
hmm
any other organizations that you know of that we should know of that are like in the same ballpark as y'all? Or any that's like my first question. And the second question is there anything we should be looking for from queer rebels um
Mm,
in the near
right.
future?
Yeah, I mean, we just got done with a slew of shows because, like, once the pandemic hit, we moved everything online. And we've actually put on, I guess, since February, we've put on like about 6 or 7 shows so far, right?
Nice.
Um, but yeah, so this is the second year we run intergenerational curatorial residency, right? And
Mhm.
so this is the second year. So basically, that show is going to be coming up probably like March, April.
Mhm, mhm.
And then like the last show we just had, and we'll probably we do like a literary salon called Give Us the Word.
Nice.
And like I said, we just had that on November the 19th. And I want to say to people, you know, you can go to our website, which is queerrebels.org. And all of the we have like three past shows up now that you can watch like from our website, and get a good feeling of what we do. And then of course we have now for the last 12 years, Queer Rebels has produced what's called Queer Rebel Fest. And we usually do that in June, usually as part of the National Queer Arts Festival. But we don't know what's up with that this year, because of the COVID stuff and whatnot. So that's to look forward to, like I said, in June. And we're actually going to produce it on June 19th. So we're going to have it's going to be a Juneteenth show. It's going to be all Black people.
Yeah.
And, so we're really looking forward to that. And yeah, so that's pretty much what we got coming up in the next few months. And every once in a while it depends, because we're starting to also look into doing some co-productions with people and stuff. Between now and then somebody might show up and be like, hey, I want to do a show. And so there might be other shows between now and then, but those are the two big things that's coming up for us. Like I said, our festival in June, and then we have a Give Us the Word show in April.
So I'll make sure when I put everything up on the website that I put those links for folks to check out.
Yeah, cool. And and check out our website, because we sell some really rad t-shirts, Queer Rebel t-shirts there, and we always accept donations. So let the folks know. I mean, because really this year at the moment we're doing okay, but it's been hard because a lot there's a couple of big grants that we usually get that's not available this year because of COVID emergency stuff, right? And for us, because we don't have a building or something like that, in some ways we've been lucky, because we haven't really suffered as of yet from losing business from the pandemic, right? Because the only show we ever charge for is our Queer Rebel Fest. All of our shows are usually free. And so all of our shows have been free this year, right? So yeah, there's gonna, so next year though might be a little harder for us. So we're asking people, if you like what we do and you want to see more QT pop performance and stuff, send us a couple of dollars here and then. We know that people struggling, right? So we're not, it's not like we expecting somebody to be like, oh, I got $1,000, I'm gonna give to Queer Rebels, I mean, if you do, think about it, but we know that most people don't, right?
Yeah, but a little bit of here and there from a lot of folks, that adds up over time for sure.
It sure does, I mean, so and also, one of the things about Queer Rebels, it was started by KB Boyce, who is still with the organization. They're a co-director and a founder, and also Celeste Chan, and who is a writer, and they also now organize a lot of performances and stuff. And one of the reasons they started Queer Rebels, and one of the reasons I was excited about coming on board, is we were and we remain really serious about paying people too.
Yeah.
So for us, that's been one of the good things about the COVID, is because we haven't had to pay for venues. We've been able to pay more performers, right? And to pay them a bit more money than maybe we would have paid last year. So we've been kind of putting all our energy really into trying to get people paid, because so much stuff has been canceled, right? And a lot of performers, not able to make money because a lot of the shows have been canceled, right? So like I said, we've just kind of made it our business this year to try to again, going back to that resources, right? Trying to get resources back out into the community, by paying people to perform, right? So
that's important.
Yeah, so that that's kind of what we've been up to. And we're looking into, because we kind of have lost the funding for our intergenerational curatorial residency, but we're confident we can find more funding for that. So that's something we'll be looking for soon, is we'll be trying to we'll put a call out for people who are interested in doing that residency.
Oh, thank you for all of that. It's just so informative. I appreciate learning about queer rebels.
Mhm,
I'm gonna pivot a little bit and we're gonna go into talking about you some more.
mhm.
What is how do you sexually identify?
I identify as genderqueer, and queer, and that's like, and for me that's been again like since the '90s, right? And and personally, like I said, I'm like 59, and I love this like idea that we're constantly coming up with new labels, new ways of identifying. Um, because for me, honestly, when people be all like, I don't like labels, it sounds to me like they're being like, I don't like language. Um,
Mm,
because for
mm,
me, labels, I mean, we all have labels.
yeah.
Like if I say I'm a sister, that's a label,
Mhm.
right? If I say I'm a graduate, that's a label. So for me, like I said, labels are just the beginning of a conversation. It's only problematic when people think it's the end of a conversation,
I
as
see.
far as I'm concerned.
I see.
So yeah, I've like for a long time I've identified as genderqueer, um, and queer, right? And for me, these also are political things. It's not just about who I sleep with.
Yeah.
Um, because honestly, the word like lesbian never like really appealed to me. I always had like identified as a dyke.
Hmm.
Because
Really,
to
so
me,
really, you've always preferred dyke over lesbian?
yes,
Oh, okay.
well,
Tell me
because
about
for me, lesbian always sort of also seemed like about who you slept with.
mm-hmm.
And to me, like the word dyke also carried like almost like a badge of honor of like, yes, I know I'm an outsider. And
Mm-hmm.
um and like my work is like political, right? My love is political, my work is political, the way I live is political. And it's not just about like who I want to have sex with. It's
Mm-hmm.
also about like having a critique of like the society I'm like
Yeah.
part of,
Mhm.
right? And moving in, and how that affects me, but also how like my sexuality, my politicization affects who I am in the world, right?
That's so interesting because I feel like people who are like my age or younger would say that they don't like the term dyke. They find it very, so it's, everyone's different, but I feel like dyke has always had like a harshness to it
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that people aren't willing to jump into. So
Yeah, yeah,
I love your response.
yeah. But it's the same thing like with fag, right? A
Yeah.
lot of like gay men don't want to be called fags or faggots, and like, for me, for instance, one, I try to like address people in the way they say they want to be addressed, regardless of how I feel about it, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so that's like first and foremost. But also like for instance, when I came to San Francisco, shortly after that, I joined, the activist group Act Up San Francisco,
Mhm, mhm,
right?
mhm.
And that was the place where people pretty much like, it wouldn't be nothing to be like, oh hey faggot, or like, like have a seat, you dyke or something like that, and like we kind of like use this language, and for us it was kind of like it was a time of sort of reclaiming, right?
Yes, yes.
And then the same thing, like when Queer Nation came up, there was a lot of backlash because a lot of the like gays, older gay people who were older then,
Mhm,
um, they had bad connotations from being called a queer,
mhm, mhm.
right? So the words are always sort of like, I don't think there's any labels or language that will satisfy everyone.
Yeah.
And for me, that's the greatness of having many labels,
Mhm. Is that it's all malleable. It
right?
depends.
Right. And that the label doesn't choose you, you actually choose the label,
Yeah.
right? So, like, for instance, like the other day, like, I guess when that, what's the name of that little white person, Elliot, somebody came out as trans,
Uh,
and I was on the Twitters, and like somebody was all like bemoaning the loss of like lesbians, right? And I was kind of like, man, see, I'm like 59 years old, so
yeah.
I remember even here in San Francisco, you know, when, you know, it was always a question about who could be a lesbian, right? I remember being in ACT UP, people's dying all around us, having a 3-hour meeting because some woman wanted to call herself a bi-dyke. Right? You know, so I'm kind of like, you can't be working all hard for years to basically kick people out of the club and then bemoan the fact that somebody now like want to identify as something else. You know what I'm saying? You know, and I feel like that's sometimes like the problem with sort of oppressed groups. We're so busy, and sometimes for good reason, right?
Yes.
But we're so busy like picking and choosing who can be in the in group, and steady, like, you know, creating out groups, you know,
Within
which is basically
the outsiders of the outsiders. Where does that
yes, you know, and
Yeah.
it's basically recreating what, like, you know, white supremacy and capitalism creates in the first place. Because they're, you know, in those systems, there has to be an out group. There always has to be an out
In order for the hierarchy to maintain itself.
Exactly, right? So, you know, so I was kind of like, come on now, right? And for me, it's not about losing something, it's about gaining something. And even though, like I said, I consider myself to be what is now, I guess, called like gender non-binary, I also still consider myself a dyke because it's in me.
Okay.
Because I was there and I've come along and things have changed. But for me, it's not like I've shed my dykeness.
You're right.
I've added other things.
As the language has transformed.
As the language has transformed, but also as the possibilities have opened up. You know what I'm saying? So along with labels, new expressions, also for me comes possibilities.
Whew. I'm going to go into this. I want to hear what you think about this. So I agree with you. I feel so. I'm going to say this publicly. I guess I say the word faggot. I know a bunch of faggots. I run with faggots. That's just like, that there's certain language that I was inundated with that I feel like I'm not getting rid of. And I'm 29, 30, about to be 30. And then there's other words too where people like, you can't, so it's like RuPaul, you can't say tranny, and RuPaul's like, fuck you, I know trannies. And it's like, and I think as a result of the internet, right, the culture that we have of the internet, that there is a cancel culture where you're practicing similar to what you said, where it's like if you're not participating in the ways that we feel are acceptable, and sometimes there's folks who do need to be held accountable for very bad actions, and there needs to be like, hey, you have done harm, you cannot participate, this is not okay. But sometimes I feel like after a while we're just pointing our fingers at each other because we're trying to uphold this level of respectability. So I'm asking you, as an elder, what is your take on cancel culture and how that has manifested in our communities these days?
Well, I have to say, first and foremost, I don't believe that there's any cancel culture because regardless of what if people think about what RuPaul like says, RuPaul still has a goddamn show and making bank. So he has not been canceled. And most of the people who people talk about haven't been canceled, ain't canceled at all, right? You know what I'm saying? I mean, so first and foremost, I have to say that. Because like, I mean, that's been like on my mind for a while. And also the thing I would say, and like I said, let's just, you use RuPaul as an example here. I feel like this is an example. I think people aren't just upset with RuPaul for using a word.
Right.
RuPaul also has a history.
Right.
And see, I feel like this is the mistake we make, is that we focus sometimes on this one thing and we're like, oh, they're like canceling RuPaul, but RuPaul has a history and people have tried to call him in and he's all like, I'm gonna do what I want. And I don't go for that. personally, because like I said, I can call myself anything I want. But if I come into a room and someone explicitly says to me, when you use this word, I find it hurtful, then I mean, to me, it's a little bit like the mask wearing thing. So what, I have to say this word, or like, I'm somehow less of a person or whatnot. I mean, it's not like I won't ever use that word, because like you said, like me too. I mean, I have friends that we explicitly call each other these words, faggot and dyke and stuff like this, right?
Right.
To be quite honest, when I have speaking engagements and stuff, I don't feel like it's my right to just use those words in this mixed company.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, that's accurate too. That's
right. And so like
where.
Yeah, and it's also about like the platform you have or not, right? And it's just like, so yes, I don't feel like there's this thing where we kind of just have the right to say what we want like all the time, because yes, there's a difference between if you have a right and if it's right.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And so we have a lot of rights. There's a lot of things that any of us can do in any given time or moment, right? But the question is, for me, is this right? Is it hurtful? Do I need to like be like this way in this moment? I mean, there's like plenty of fights to have, right? We got plenty to fight about, plenty to fight for. And I'm a little bit like, is this the fight I want to have? My right to be faggot. I mean, I mean, for me, I'm more interested in, like the professor that just got fired from like Mississippi, the University of Mississippi, for being about his work, which is like fighting racism. You know what I'm saying? So I'm more interested in that kind of censorship.
Okay.
I
agree. I think as a community, I feel like us younger folk, like we, or just us in general, I think we get caught up in the politics of respectability. And that bothers me sometimes. I mean, I feel like we spend time policing each other than prioritizing what we should be fighting for and valuing as we move to, radicalize the world around us, for sure.
Right. But I think there's a difference between respectability politics, because the way I understand respectability politics is not about us sort of offhandedly disrespecting each other or not, but this idea that if we're just this, or if we look like that, or we go to this college and dress like this, then we'll be fine. Right. That like somehow like the way we dress. I mean, because again, like I said, I was in ACT UP San Francisco, and I remember being booed at like gay pride parades. I remember like having to fight like some like, gay guys in the Castro to like, put up signs or, write stuff on the streets and stuff like this, right? So, and that was because a lot of those people didn't thought that like being loud and provocative, was gonna like cause us more trouble, right? So to me, that's kind of respectability politics, believing that if you just act this way, if you talk nicely, I mean, it's the same thing with this defund the police thing, right? Like as though, I mean, what I like to point out about that is when I hear that is basically, white people, the majority of white people have voted for whiteness or the Republican Party in every like modern day election. And if it hadn't have been defund the police, it would be like, Kamala Harris is a Muslim. You know what I'm saying? So that's also to believe that there's something we could do as like queer people, and especially as queer people of color, that there's something that we could do if we would just do X, then straight people be all right, you know, or just like, the white people be all right, if we would just do these things, right? And to me, that's what respectability politics is about. Making space for difference and difference of opinion and difference of feeling, to me, is not respectability politics. It is about widening the tent.
Okay.
Right? Because what I've also experienced is that somebody who might have trouble with the word dyke or fag or something like that, if you are in this group and you're willing to discuss it, but also to actually show who you are and to show what you're about, I also see those things like calming down, right? I've seen people not so much change their mind, but ease up, right? Because they realize they're not under attack, that things change, that words change, that lingo comes and goes. That's the nature of language. That's the beauty of language, right? That is not static, and that meaning is not static. So again, for me, it's about like kind of like knowing these things when we are using these words and thinking about these things rather than just being like, oh, I can say what I want. I'm free. I can do what I want, because we need us, right?
We do.
And so that's the question is like, for me, the question is like, do I alienate a ally? Like, do I alienate like some 65-year-old, like, Black queer because I can't stop saying faggot? No.
Like, is it worth it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and again, like I said, don't get me wrong. I believe that expression is always important. And I believe that it's important for us as individuals also to be able to express ourselves in ways we like. But at the same time, like I said, if I'm sitting in this room with you trying to do this work and you say, oh, when you say this, it's like, triggering to me, or let me not say triggering, because also I feel like there's a point there where people use the word triggered when they're uncomfortable, right? I mean, which is not what it's about, right? But so let me back that up and say like somebody would be just like, people yelled at to me when they were chasing me down the street when I was a 16-year-old boy. Right?
That's a whole nother perspective.
It's a whole nother perspective. And like I'm saying, that's not important. You know what I'm saying? And again, like that don't mean you got to change your life or stop calling your friends faggots. But you might think about, if y'all in the same room, to maybe not, do that. Right?
And that's out of consideration and love for community.
Exactly. And so, like I said, we can look at things a lot of different ways, but we can also think about like love and community, and figuring out how we like create that. And again, don't get me wrong, I'm not a big believer in safe spaces. I'm a believer in safer spaces, or safe enough spaces, right? I usually say, well, this space was safe enough for me to do the things I wanted to do, or
I was gonna what well, I'm gonna kind of blend these questions. So
all right.
where do you find home? Well, two of the questions I ask is where do you find home, and when do you feel safe? So talk to me about your feelings regarding safety, because some people are like, yes, there are safe spaces, I can create that. And then some people are like, we're like, nothing in the society, nothing in our society actually creates for safety to happen. At any point, safety could be infiltrated upon, even if we create that. So what is that for you?
Well, I mean, okay, so basically I do these like what I call like dream workshops, right? Where I create a space for people to dream. And I try to create a safe enough space for that, right? And one of the things we kind of think about in these dream spaces is where we locate our dreams, right? And so for me, what's always been clear is that I've never really located my dreams in institutions. My dreams have been located in community and people, right? So as I've gotten older, the places that feel safer for me are places where I have a modicum of control. Let me put it that way. I mean, like, for instance, you know, like our Queer Rebel meetings, right? We meet like once a week. We try to now like hold our meetings to about half an hour, truth to tell. We we create a space where, like, you know, like my partner, like KB, like, that I work with mostly, and we've recently hired a few more people, and we've tried to institute this where we actually spend time talking about how we're doing. And it's not cursory. It's not like, oh, how y'all doing? Oh, I'm all right. It's like we spend time talking about it. And if we have to talk about it for the whole meeting, we do.
Yeah.
Right? Because we actually have some control here. Because KB and I are pretty much our own bosses, right? So we can create something here, right? I mean, so I think this is, maybe it's not the most detailed answer, but I would say I find safety in places where I have a modicum of control, where I feel like I'm able to be like, oh, I need this today instead of that. Where I as an individual and other individuals can just be like, I need to do something different today. Or just to be like, I'm having a shit ass day. We can't meet today. Can we meet tomorrow? You know?
It's just gonna be what it is. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I feel like a safe space is where I feel like I can be honest about my limitations, my wants and desires. And so it's not a physical space for me, right? That space changes. And what I've done now at my age is I've like gathered people in my life who give me that space, you know?
Amongst folks, you talked a little bit about being in Berlin and then coming back to the Bay Area, like this is it. Or do you feel like the Bay is home, or do you feel like community is home, or do you just feel like wherever you go, home?
Well, I feel like I can make home now pretty much anywhere I go. And that depends on like finding some like-minded people that I can be with. And people, you know, I mean, let me be honest, the freest I ever feel is when I'm alone. I mean, that's real talk, right? That's the freest I ever feel. But being with the people in my life that I know who kind of like see me, and also I was talking with a friend about this last night, right? And we were talking about like self-care and community care and how those things sort of work. And like she was kind of like saying that like for her, that self-care is not about like taking baths and going to the spa. It's more about like, you know, just being able to say, I can't do this today. Just being able to say, like, I know I promised I was going to come to this thing, but I can't do it, right? Being able to ask for help. And my response to that is that, like, yeah, that's where the community comes in, because this society does not encourage those types of things. But I have friends in my life who encourage me that if I say, oh, I know I said we were going to do this today, but, you know, I'm feeling some kind of way, that they support me in that. That there's no like, oh, but you could do this and blah, blah, blah. It's like, cool, take care of yourself, right? So those things make me feel safe. Those things make me feel at home, that I have people who are like encourage me to, and who are actually willing to help me, like do self-care. I mean, I'm like, I hate doctors. I hate going to the doctor. I need to go to the doctor, but I don't like it because I'm fat and I'm Black. And I don't have a good like history with doctors, right? But, you know, but I have friends who are just like, you know, you should go to the doctor, but I totally understand what you're saying. So when you're ready, you know, call me. I'll go with you. You know, so like those are the things that make me feel at home and that give me a feeling of safety, right? And so no matter where I go, if I have that, I feel like I can make home there. And also it is community. I mean, I live in a place called Baker's Dozen. This is a 13-person co-op.
Yeah, tell me about Baker's Dozen. Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, well, when I talk to people and they're like, why you live here and stuff, I say like clearly that for me, living here is part of what I call my justice dreams, right? About like trying to create the world we want to live in. Because Baker's dozen is 13 people. We only have 10 now because of other things and the epidemic and stuff, you know. But we are intergenerational. I think the oldest person who lives here is maybe like 64, 65. The youngest person is like early 20s.
What is that interaction like? Do you all spend a lot of time learning
Well,
about
I
each other?
well, well, I mean, you know, it depends really, right? I mean, also one of the things that's going on is we've been in the process of trying to reimagine like what we want to be and like rewriting our agreements and stuff, because a lot of the agreements and stuff that were written before a lot of the people who live here now was living here, right? So we have meetings where, you know, we mostly kind of do business, but we always have like check-ins and check-outs. I feel like I learned stuff from like the younger people who live here. One of the reasons why I wanted to do that, because I also feel like it's not about staying young, but it's about staying current, right?
Yeah,
So
that's a very beautiful distinction.
yeah, because I'm happy to be growing old. Um, you know, I love it that I'll be like 60 in a few months.
When's your
And
birthday?
March the 19th.
Oh, you are the same birthday as my sister. You're Pisces.
Yes, I am. And on the cusp, you know, I mean, you know, so I'm ecstatic about it, right? Because I mean, and truth to tell, because 4 or 5 years ago, I didn't even wasn't sure I wanted to be here, you know.
Okay, go ahead.
And I, you know, and like a lot of people, we've been through these things, right? So, like I said, I'm fantastic with getting older, because also I feel like I've learned so much, and now I can like put so much of that into practice, right? And I don't know, I just feel like I got so many tools now that, like, you know, I can deal with a lot of things, like, and in ways that are creative and expansive. And I just feel like I can actually just be like a lot more open now, because I know a lot more about the world in some ways, but mostly about myself, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, so in any case, I feel like I can be a good example here in the house. But I also feel, like I said, like the younger people, you know, they keep me current. They help me stay current. They help me know kind of like what's going on, and just like sharing like our political experiences and like, you know, and like, even though like I think the majority of the people in the house right now are Black people, but we all still have different experiences of
The
Blackness.
Blackness. Yep.
You know what I'm saying? That we can share with each other. There's one person who lives here. We're both from Virginia, and probably we grew up maybe like, well, I was probably like actually still, I was probably living out here maybe by the time they was like growing up, right? You know, but we grew up in the same state, like really like just maybe 2 hours away from each other, right? And it's funny because we kept meeting people, like every time we go out together, we meet other people who are from Virginia. That's where I'm originally from and where they're from, right? And so like there's all these like crossovers and ways we are the same but very different. And like I said, even among the Black people in this house, there we have lived in different ways, like I said, is in different ways of being Black. So even that I find like so exciting, and just to talk about. I mean, like one of our roommates, you know, is like originally from here, grew up in the Bayview, right? And I love like hearing their experiences and like, you know, like how they see this place, right? Um, and so like, yeah, I feel like we learn from each other. And I feel like we get to look through other lenses, which I feel like is what we need so much in this world, is like, you know, spaces where we can kind of step out of ourselves a little bit and see things through, you know, through somebody else's lenses, but also from a different position. because positionality is hella important.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I agree with everything you're saying, because that's why I created BlackQueer.Alive. I was
Mhm.
like, I feel like there's such a stagnancy in considering like what blackness and queerness looks like together. So
Right,
like, let me interview as many people as possible so that,
right, right, right,
so like my perspective is not going to be the same as your perspective, as
right,
someone who's, you know, someone who lives in France's perspective, and we're all at different ages, and
right, right, right.
there has to be like a myriad of expressions, because
Yeah,
once we fail to at least address that myriad, they're always, not they, but we, or the what's going to happen is there's always just going to be like this
mm-hmm.
framing of what, you know, black and queer means. So I
Right,
agree. I
right.
definitely.
And we can't let outside forces. That's why I was interested in this project when I saw it,
Mhm.
is that we can't let outside forces shape like our stories and our narratives. So stuff like this allows us, and that's why, like I said, I love like Queer Rebels. That's why I've all spent all these years like making space for like other, you know, queer Black people and people of color to make art, because I like absolutely believe that, you know, it is our job to create our own narratives. And the more different narratives we make, the more people, you know, who can like actually join in. Because, you know, I think about like some young queer kid experiencing, you know, their own queerness, and still even this day and time not seeing anyone on TV or whatever that like reflects that, right? But like through our, you know, through like something like this, what you're doing, or like somebody sees a show. And to be quite honest, that's one of the reasons why I'm excited about like I want to do live performance again, don't get me wrong, but I also love this thing that we can be online, and
Mhm.
that who can see our shows now,
Yeah.
right? As appeared to as opposed to the 100 or so people who might be sitting in the audience in a given night.
I want to go back a
Mm.
little bit to something that you said just right now. Is there anybody, like the first person on screen, where you saw yourself in media or stories growing up?
Um, not really, to be quite honest, because again, you know, when I was growing up, which was like in the 60s, 70s, you know, and into the 80s, there were very few like Black characters on television, right?
Yeah.
Like no outwardly queer ones,
Mhm.
and no fat ones, except for like mammies,
Yeah.
um, or, you know, best
Yeah.
friends, you know, comic relief, even now, really, right? And and I don't know of any like Black fat butch women, like, you know, that's taking up a lot of space in the, in, you know, in the media sphere or something like that, right? Um,
Not even today,
so
really.
I mean,
Not
so
even today.
yeah, yeah. I mean, so basically, for me, one of that's one of the reasons for me as well why I have also appeared in front of the camera. Is because like even back in the '90s, you know, I've had like, you know, sort of sexy pictures taken. I've had like, you know,
Yeah.
like other pictures taken. You know, I've done like porn. I've done you know, I've made like videos myself. I've made like 3 videos myself where like where my body is the subject, and
Mhm.
I do that because I haven't seen anyone like me. I
Mm.
mean, let me say this also, I'm a bit of an exhibitionist, even though I'm also an introvert, so that helps.
Mm.
But really, you know, one of the experiences I had when I was living in Berlin, I got to do this project working with women, like with women of color and immigrant lesbians, right? We got to do this whole project where we got to make like documentaries um, in Berlin, where I was living, in Vienna, and in Paris. And I was the coordinator of the project. And I remember one of the hardest things was getting people in front of the camera.
Mhm.
I mean, and for reasons you might not suspect. I mean, like I remember there was one woman in Vienna who was from Argentina, and they were still afraid of what they call the dictator, right? Pinochet, right? Like because of the repression there, right? There was another woman who was Turkish but had grown up in Vienna, who was afraid to be in front of the camera because they were like, well, what if they become fascists again? Then we'll be out there, right? And also then there were people afraid that like once their image got out, it would have no more control of it, which is true. You know, so I was like, you're right, you know, that is the truth. But we also have to ask ourselves, we have some responsibility to other queers who don't get this chance? And for me, I couldn't say to any of the other women, you got to do this because of X, Y, and Z. But that's one of the things that I've always felt. You know, it's never been easy for me to be naked because I'm living in a society that don't appreciate my body or what I look like. So it was never easy. But I've always felt that it was necessary, that when I got the chance, that I couldn't be like, oh no, you know, I'm afraid, you know, whatever, that I had to like kind of step up and like put my actual self on the line. And so for me, like having pictures taken and stuff, it wasn't like, oh, I'm gonna be famous, but it was basically like, there might be some young Black person out here who is also maybe genderqueer, who also don't quite look like what people think, who's also fat, and to see me and see my fat ass all like, look at me and be like, hey,
I could do that.
I could do that. I'm okay. Other people, I'm not alone. You know what I'm saying? So for me, that's kind of what that has been about. And like, you know, just being like kind of willing to be in those spaces where I've never, it's not like I felt safe. I mean, even when working with friends that I know, right? Or even making my own videos. Like, and basically I was a, you know, director, the person in the video, and I did editing, right? Yeah. So even in that space, it wasn't like I was feeling all super safe because my intent was to put it out in the world and have other people see it. And I was like, and it was never a thing of like, you know, that's gonna be all right. I was always ready for any backlash. It's not like I've gotten a lot, right? But
you're right. It's the nature of being creative, of
right,
like, of vulnerability.
Because I've also accepted that once I put something out in the world, then I have lost control of it in a lot of ways. And that's just the reality of the interwebs, where, you know, the places where we live, right? I mean, I don't know where any of those pictures are showing up or whoever. And sometimes like people, I remember my niece once, like was like, I guess it was last year when I was home in Virginia, my niece, so I guess like about 25, we were just chatting and stuff. And then she was like, oh, you know, I saw a video of you. And I was all like, and what was I doing?
Like, wait, hold on, which one?
Right? And I was all like, what was I doing in that video, right? You know? I mean, this time it was pretty innocent, but you know, so I have to think about stuff like that, right? But to me, it's worth it. It's so worth it, because sometimes I've met people who have said to me, like one of the first performance spaces that, you know, I was involved with, I had people come up to me all the time and say, I came to this place because I saw you standing at the counter. I saw you and I thought, I can be in this space, right? And even in Berlin, right? My girlfriend and I in Berlin, we own this like women's cafe and art house. And I will never forget, there was a young Turkish woman, a dyke, right? And at that time, very young, like early 20s. And they came to me and was like, you know, I walked into this place, I saw this big Black dyke with a bald head and a t-shirt on that said Fist Fuckers Berlin. And I was all like, I'm home, you know?
That's beautiful. I love that.
So, you know, what I've learned is like being myself and being as out as I can be And really about the whole of me, because one of the things we haven't talked about is I also identify as a BDSM dyke, which
Tell-
hasn't always worked for a lot of other Black people in my life,
Mhm.
but it also has worked for other Black people who saw me and was like, hey, I can be in this space.
How long have you participated in BDSM?
About 35 years,
Okay.
you know?
How did you that's a long time.
Yeah.
How did you get into it? Like what was that initiation?
Well, I mean, it is so funny. Like I've heard these stories. I mean, I would say like one of my favorite stories to tell is that even when I was a kid, right, my brother, who was like about a year older than me, so we were always kind of like play buddies, right, because we were about the same age, and we looked a lot alike. People used to think we were twins. So one day we were just playing around, and we had a picnic table out in our backyard with benches, and he was like dared me that I couldn't tie him up. So I like basically tied him up to that bench. And he was out there for hours, right? I mean, because he couldn't get loose. And I basically was upstairs, like just looking out the window, just watching him most of the time until a neighbor was all like, Ms. Mason, your son out tied up on the bench outside,
Oh,
and, then
wow.
and then my mom called me and she's like, did you tie up your brother? And I was all like, yeah, So, I mean, without even knowing it, I feel like I always got some sort of joy about some things. So then in my adult life, I used to live in Washington, D.C. And I finally was like telling a friend about it and was kind of like, I don't know anybody else who's like doing this and stuff. And then they introduced me to somebody, right? And so
Wow, just
then that was like my start of like consensual, intentional BDSM, right? Because there was some unintentional shit happening that, yeah, so it was really good for me to like be in a space where I could sort of claim that part of me, and then it allowed me to be safe.
Do you still participate in BDSM?
Well, I mean, it's a little hard now with this pandemic, and I'm actually kind of missing it, to tell you the truth. I mean, the last thing I did, I think the last public thing I've done was like maybe like, besides like, in my personal life, I think one of the last public things I did was we had like actually somebody that I'm involved with through like a BDSM play party to benefit QuackMap.
Mm-hmm.
And so so I like doing stuff like that. My relationships pretty much all involve like BDSM one way or the other. Honestly, my saying is, if you want to have sex with me, somebody's gonna get hurt. I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
I love that.
don't have to be you, doesn't have to be me, but one of us is probably gonna get hurt.
I love that so much. Thank you for that one. Oh, okay. Okay, let's pivot a little bit. Thank you for
Yeah.
that one. Um, mm, mm.
Where's my water? Okay.
When's the first time you realized you were Black?
Again, that's funny. I was thinking about that last night. And I feel like it must have been when like I was like around 8 or 9 years old, and I don't exactly know what the conversation was like or how it came about, but I found out through like maybe overhearing my mom or something talking. My mom was working at a department store in Richmond, the seat of the South and capital of the South. And somehow or another, it was revealed, or I found out, that she couldn't eat in the same lunchroom as her coworkers.
Mm-hmm.
And you realize this happened in my lifetime.
Right.
Right. And I feel like that's when it really occurred to me that we was Black.
Yeah.
And also, to be quite honest, you know, when I was talking about this last night, one of the things I realized, and just realized, like when talking about this last night, is that I used to dream I was white.
Whoa.
Like in my dreams, I saw myself as a white person. And I realized now that came from watching television, and I used to read a lot, you know, so a lot of the characters, any of the characters who had adventures and things of this sort were white.
Wow.
And so I used to dream, when I would dream of myself in the world as an older person, as someone having adventures and things, I used to see myself as white.
Wow.
And I think that stopped, like when I, like, you know, like I said, sometime after that discovery about my mom, but also just knowing a little bit about more about the world, and also like kind of receiving negative messages about what it was like to be Black. And you know, growing up, and like my grandmother used to always say that I was like contrary as hell. So I think that also, like, you know, when I found out that, like, you know, when I realized the negative connotations of being Black and being, you know, a woman, it almost kind of made me want to be more of that, if that makes sense.
Okay.
You know,
because they told you couldn't be.
Right. And
Mm-hmm.
also through reading a lot, and like I used to read a lot, and I'll tell anybody, reading saved my life.
Mm-hmm.
And it gave me an idea of possibilities. But there came a point where I could also see myself in the stories. So I didn't have to be white in my dreams or imaginings anymore, that I could actually see my Black self in part of these stories, right?
Yeah.
That I was reading or seeing on television. And, you know, and literally one of my favorite things was always to place myself in stories, other people's stories.
I'm gonna be Peter Pan today, goddamn.
Yeah, you know.
Powerful. I like that transition of like initially seeing yourself within like a white context, but then reclaiming that and be like, no, I have that capacity.
Mm-hmm.
That's powerful.
And also, to be quite honest, that anything I do, I did because, you know, this is not about that story of like, oh, everybody used to think that I was like acting white and stuff like this, you know. It's
100%.
not about that. But what it is about is that, like, you know, it's not like we didn't see ourselves very many places. So we all had a narrow idea of what Blackness could look like, right? And so I remember, like, also moving here, and after a couple of years, you know, I like had sort of like dreadlocks and shaved on the side, but my dreads was like this deep purple. And I remember being in the Walgreens down in Castro, and the older Black man was kind of like, why you got your hair like that? And I was all like, what you mean? And I was all like, you know, purple? You know, he was all like, yeah, you know. And then he was all like, yeah, you know, that's like a white person thing, you know, white people thing. And I was kind of like, well, the way I see it is that I'm Black. And if I do it, it's a Black person thing, you know, because like my feeling is like, even if there's only one other Black person in the world doing a thing, which there never is, you know what I'm saying? There never is.
Yeah.
That is never just one Black person somewhere doing a thing. But even if there was only one Black person with purple hair, it's a Black thing.
Right.
You know? And so that was also part of it for me. It was like this decision that I wasn't going to let white things belong to white people if I had an interest in it, if it was fun for me, if I thought. Now, I mean, also now, don't get me wrong, as I got older, I have had to question and continue question where my desires come from, like how it's shaped by white supremacy and capitalism and stuff like that. So that's a given, and that's always necessary. But what I'm saying, though, is that I refuse to let whiteness take something from me because it was for white people.
Yeah.
If I was interested in it, you know, if it piqued something in me, right? Because, like, for instance, I've always liked all kinds of music. But also, when I was growing up as a kid in the 60s, radio stations, there was top 40 radio stations where they played all kinds of music. So I grew up liking basically everything, right? And like a game I used to play with a friend of mine was we'd make up. So basically, the game was is you either made up a song or you sang a real song, and the other person would have to be like, "Is that something you made up? Or was a real song?" Right? But I had a wider repertoire because I used to listen to white music, so I could always like win because
Oh yeah.
yeah, right? And because they'd be like, "That's made up." And I'm like, "Oh, it's just a white person song," So it was also for me, it was just about curiosity and having space, right? And then there was also the thing is like when I was growing up and I was young, for some reason, librarians at the schools always kind of like fell in love with me, right? And would let me just hang out in libraries, right? Like for years, right? I mean, I used to literally cut class and like just hang out in the library, right? And read books. Where I then started to find like, Maya Angelou's books. The first time I saw If Bill Street Could Talk, and stuff like that, right? And like I found like Billie Holiday's biography and things of this sort, right? Just being in the libraries. So I also then started to place myself in those spaces. And I still sometimes like to imagine what I would have been like in the Harlem Renaissance, right? I still like to imagine, like how could I have lived back then?
That I have to place when I was younger, I would place myself in those scenarios. I wonder who I'd be too. Damn it.
Yeah, right. Don't
Right
get me wrong. I don't know. I'm not like saying that I wanted that. Like, I mean, we still dealing with fucking racism and the residue, right? From
But
all those years, but it was different. So I'm wondering, like, how I would have been, how I could have lived my life if I would have been alive, right? Because even, I mean, like, I still have friends who laugh at me because if some cop stops me in the car, I don't know how to act. I can't be all like, yes, sir. I'm all like, here's my license, blah, blah, blah. Like a friend of mine was mortified once when we got stopped by the cops because I just couldn't act right, right? So I'm all like, would I have been able to act right then? You know what I'm saying? So like, like I said, I feel like when I'm placing myself in these places, I'm thinking about the sort of fantastic lives that people seem to have been able to live, right? Sometimes, right? Outside of the norm, outside of the Black norm and outside of the white norms, right?
just kind of live in their, walk down their own yellow brick road, like just
Somehow, and so I wonder about that stuff, and like I said, but also, like I said, eventually it wasn't just like white adventurers. I came across Black people who were also adventurers, right? And I'm not talking about adventures about going other places, but I mean adventurous in the way they were moving through the world.
Yeah, how they see themselves, how once they saw themselves as capable in any capacity, what then could they create?
Right.
Yeah, I wish that I feel like I'm loving everything you're saying because I feel like these are the questions that are going through my mind right now. Uh, I don't know. I feel I'm just gonna start rambling, but I feel like because we have reached certain markers in representation, I guess you could say, I
Right.
still do feel like Black and queer folks and Black people in general have been framed like we are being pigeonholed into talking a certain way, walking a certain way, valuing certain things, and telling only these type of stories.
Right.
So listening to you, it reinforces that no, the work isn't done, and we're still the inputs and the outputs and the possibilities that we can still manifest. It's not done yet. It probably won't ever be done.
Right. 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 Well, I mean, because it's the same way. Like even now, right? People talking about like how bad like socialism is, and they acting like there was never any Black socialists or communists or left wing people. And that's always been in our communities.
Right,
Maybe not in the middle of the community, but those people have always been, right? I mean, some of them left. I mean, Jimmy Baldwin went to France, right?
Well, Jimmy Baldwin went to
Mm,
France. Richard Wright went to France. Richard
right.
was so angry he didn't even come back. He said, "I
I
want
know,
to
right?
it." Yeah.
I mean, so it's not, so maybe some people had to leave, but they've always been around,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's always, I mean, like one of the first shows, like with Queer Rebels, they've started out like their first two shows were basically called Queer Rebels of the Harlem Renaissance.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, for me, that was like me getting back also into like doing art rather than administrating art, right? Because they invited me into the show and I made a video, right? And it was all about like, how queer Harlem actually was.
Yeah.
And then, but what we also know is how hard people have worked to unqueer it. I mean, Langston Hughes's family are still suing people
Why, for saying he was gay?
for saying he was gay. Yes, I mean, so I feel like that's also why it's important. I had a portrait done by this white artist named Catherine Opie. And she's like relatively well known, and she did this whole series of like queers in the 90s and stuff. And I remember when she had asked me if I would sit, and I was kind of like, yeah. Um, and also, following my idea of like being willing to put myself in the world. But one of the things that clinched it for me, I asked them, I said, well, Catherine, why are you doing this, right? What's the import to you? And she said that she was doing it because she didn't want it to happen that one day they would say we didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like what's so important. I mean, unfortunately, like last couple of days, Lynn Keller died, and Lynn Keller is a lesbian, and she runs the Bay Area Lesbian Archive.
Wow.
And like I said, she just died a couple of days ago, but she's like, again, she is a keeper of our history, but you hardly hear anything about her, right?
I've
I
never
mean,
heard.
you don't even know her, right? And like, she's been doing this for like since the 80s, right? Like she's made a couple of films and stuff, but she's almost disappeared. But luckily her work won't, because there is a complete archive of work, right?
Right, and the work is going to communicate her legacy. I feel
And
that.
what she saw and how she saw it, right? And and it's the same thing with like this work you're doing. Because of the interwebs, the people that you interview, people who may never get to like, do this sort of thing, or to be seen like outside of their own communities, they can't say we didn't exist.
Right, we're right here.
We're right here, and there's evidence, right? uh there's things that are left behind.
Mhm. Trails.
So yeah, this is one reason why, like I said, I really appreciate like this work that you're doing, and was like happy that you chose me to be a part of it. So I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you for being here. I feel like a sponge right now. I'm just learning so much. Time I have to like with most people I have to like, you got to massage them out of certain answers, and I just feel like I'm learning, like I feel like a student right now, but like the best time. um Besides tying up your brother for hours outside, tell me about the first time you realized you were queer.
Oh, wow. Hmm. Well, it's kind of funny. I guess the first time that I really realized that I was queer is I found some gay porn
Wow.
of like some like porn like with like the gay men, like they was in the Navy or something. I don't know, but that was like really kind of like the first time that it occurred to me that I was queer, right? And see,
Mm.
now I had an aunt who was what they would call a bull dyke, right? In the
Oh, okay.
60s or so, right? And like, I mean, she was like, usually dressed in khakis and some sharp, like sort of top. She had a girlfriend, and the girlfriend came to all of our family functions and stuff, but
Oh.
nobody ever talked about their relationship,
Mm.
right?
So she
And
was
then,
there, like the girlfriend and your auntie were just there.
yeah, they were just there, and they lived together. Like my auntie had 3 sons, right? And so the first time it occurred to me that there was something different going on was like, I just, I had been to her house, this was my auntie, but for some reason I was upstairs and I don't know what I was doing, but I realized that there was like one bedroom for my two young cousins, and then there was a bedroom for the older boy, and then there was a bedroom for my aunt. Then I was all like, where's the other bedroom? But it wasn't another bedroom, right?
Oh, okay.
So then like so I think my sister eventually said to me that they were dykes, right? I don't know if she used the word dyke. I don't know which word she used. She might have just said funny. She might have would have said just said friends or something, I mean, it could have been any of that. But I came to realize that they were a couple.
How did that make you feel in that moment? Did you feel seen, excited?
I felt excited. I felt curious. I felt like, it was kind of like reading one of my books, right? Like trying to figure out like what's gonna happen. What's the other side of the story? What part am I gonna play in the story? So I was excited, but I didn't have anybody to talk to about it because, like, this was the 60s and the 70s. And like I said, even though my aunt was a bull dyke and everybody knew it, nobody ever talked about it. So I had no language. I had nobody to talk to about. And even though I was excited, I didn't even feel like I could talk to my aunt about it.
I was going to say, did you ever, even as you got older, talk to your aunt about?
Well, I mean, to tell you the truth, we never like just sat down and talked. But my aunt, she's not alive anymore, but she loved me and she was always very proud of me. And, but I think also a little afraid of me because I was so out.
I see.
And so no, we didn't really talk about it. But I remember the first person who ever hit on me, my aunt was like sick and in the hospital, and I went to visit her, and there was this femme in the room, which I didn't know all that then, I didn't have a word for it, but there was this femme in the room who was like flirting hard with me, right? And even now, it's hard for me to know when somebody's flirting with me. I mean, but I knew this woman was flirting with me, and I was like, she flirting with me, in my head, right? And I was all like, wow, and I was all excited. And then my aunt was all like, stop flirting with my niece. She's too old for you. Not too old. She's too young for you, right?
It was like,
right. So that was like the one time where we actually like connected, right? And like where she actually kind of opened up to me and allowed me to sort of share that space with them, right? She included me in that space because she was just like, stop flirting with my niece. She's too young for you, right?
Right now.
Yeah,
That's beautiful. It's beautiful, but also like, wow, like it exists in this one moment. That's the interaction between y'all.
Right. But also though, if I think about it, she was also like, I mean, I'm not really never been like really attracted to this specific sort of person or whatnot, but there's some tropes that I find attractive. And like this woman was like kind of like met that, right? She was kind of like in this business sort of like skirt and like, and like, so that outfit, right? I mean, I still like that, right? So that, like I said, so I'm not at all surprised that was my sort of first awakening, not to just knowing something about myself, but like actually feeling attracted to somebody else, around it, right?
I love that. If you could go back and talk to your 12-year-old self, what would you tell them?
I would tell them to not worry about being like a weirdo, that you'll find other weirdos as you grow up, and to like not to be so afraid.
The next question, it's so interesting because I usually ask people, what do you want to hear from your 60-year-old self? But you got the third 60, so that's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna up it a little bit for you. What
Okay.
do you want to hear from your 80-year-old self?
8-year-old self?
80.
80. What I want to hear from my 80-year-old self? Huh. Sit your ass down.
Sit your ass down. Okay.
Rest yourself, you know?
Okay. I love that. I love that. Whew. Crystal, how do you experience love?
Mm, also interesting. I've been thinking about that. um, it's hard sometimes because, I've spent a lot of time in my life not knowing that I was lovable.
Mm.
Um, so I experience love as this like gift. Um, and I experience love as like a possibility of care
Mm-hmm.
and a modicum of safety. Um, and but also as a place where I can also give love. So there's this space that in my world of worlds that is also circular in some ways, right? Where love is given and taken and given and taken and used and reused and and this infinite like resource.
It sounds like an infinite eight or like a level of balance.
Yeah, sort of like that. What is it called? The Ouroboros, like that, like the snake eating itself.
Mhm.
But then you also have that infinity sign, right? Um, but yeah, I mean, and because I'm also polyamorous. And so I also see love, like I said, as this infinite sort of resource that, when done the way I kind of imagine, is like is nourishment to be taken and to be given. And like if I'm like visioning it is like a full well where we can all go to. And sometimes we put water in, sometimes we take water out, you know. And there's this possibility of having a lot of our needs met, but like I said, I just see it as this sort of like continuous circle.
Have you gotten close to that circle or are you still searching for it? Or are you searching for it at all?
I've had moments,
Mm.
um, and I am still searching for that. I mean, like I was saying, I do this like dream practice, and sometimes in my dream practice I see myself like literally surrounded by love and like what that could look like, and it just feels sunny and active and joyful, you know um and it's something shared with like many people, not just me and someone else, but like this sort of like circle of love, right?
Mhm.
So that's what I'm dreaming of.
That's beautiful. That makes that makes my heart full. And it
Mm,
makes me feel like anything and like that is possible.
I hope so.
Mhm. I have two more questions.
Okay.
Um, if you could change your identity, would you? And started expanding this question to like, I really want to be a Rygal in the Milky Way, which is like a cluster of stars, or
hmm
I want to be a dragon on Tuesdays. Like,
hmm But I mean, so I'm sorry. So is the question identity wise, if I would be like something else? I mean,
identity form, there is no like, it could be identity form, animal,
well, I mean, in
body.
my I think my Facebook thing says something like I would like to be a thought.
A thought.
A thought, like a feeling,
Okay.
you
Mm.
know, a space, you know what I'm saying? So if I could be like something else besides who I am, that's what I would be. I would be like a space. I'd be a particle. I'd be, like I say, a thought or a feeling.
Something that you can't necessarily hold, but you can experience.
Yeah, something that is like, is not quantifiable. And exactly, it's like you might not be able to do this, but you could do this.
Yeah. Wow. This is amazing. Is there anything else in this moment that you want to express that I may have not touched upon?
I don't know. I mean, we've talked a lot and I've run my mouth a lot, but I'm good at it, so I don't mind, but I don't know. I would just say that what I would like at this moment is for people to really see the possibility in this moment. I know it's scary and like weird and strange, and it's asking a lot of us as individuals and as groups. But I would like people to know that this moment, there is a lot possible, but that, we can't keep talking about like things got to change. We also have to be willing to change ourselves. Right. And so I want this to be, for me and for everyone, like a moment of possibility, and for us to be thinking about what we want to do in this moment, right? And in this flow, and how we get into it.
I was talking to my friends yesterday. Do you feel like, as a people, as as Black folks and Black and queer folks, do you feel like we're playing it too safe right now, considering the times?
That's really hard to say about playing it too safe, because I also feel like there's many lanes in this revolution.
There are.
And not all of us are going to be doing the same thing, right? Or we don't all need to be doing the same thing.
I said a couple months ago, and what's been staying in my head is everyone's going to have to fight in a different arena.
Right. But the thing is, though, is we still have to figure out where we're going to fight. Right. And are we willing to fight? Because this is what I've said in the past is that I feel like we have to really do two things. We have to fight and we have to heal. And we can't wait to do one or the other. We have to do them simultaneously. And I'm a firm believer that we have to center our healing. And I'll tell you why. Because think about, like, one of the last times that Black people were like really active, like, so let's say like with the Black Panthers, right? And what happened? They got infiltrated.
Yeah, they did.
So COINTELPRO, and when you think about it, what that entailed was like playing on people's weaknesses.
Yeah.
Right. And I think there's something that hasn't been said that probably happened. I wonder how many of them were like found out to be gay and then blackmailed by the FBI. Right. Or somebody who was having some sort of freaky sex and they used it against them. So for me, what's important is that we increase our tools and take away the tools of the oppressors. And so when we know ourselves, when we work with our own shame, and in the long run to try to always lessening the shame, there's nothing they can use against us. And that is our weapon. That's our biggest weapon, is that when we heal ourselves, and like I say, get rid of all the shame. And imagine if some FBI informant came to you talking about they're going to tell something about you, and you'd be like, tell it.
Yeah. Expose it.
Right?
Expose it.
Exactly. Because, my people got me and I got my people. But in order to get there, it doesn't do us a lot of good if you heal yourself, but the community around you is still homophobic, sexist, transphobic, classes and all this kind of shit, which is basically ways that this society tools that this society has given us to hate ourselves.
Right.
Right? So imagine us being like, we don't need your tools no more. We got some better tools. So fuck off. You know, because also part of our problems, right, as Black people, as Black queers, and in the world, is there's still too many of us who don't recognize or not willing to give up our proximity to whiteness. And it's not just white people, it's us too. And because not because we're bad or we're not like good, like, you know, revolutionaries, it's because where we live, we all live in this sea. We are all swimming in this water of white supremacy and racism.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, the question is, who wants to get out? Who wants to reach the shore?
Who wants to take
You
the first breath?
Mm-hmm. I mean, because like for white, like I said, with white people, even my friends, I have lots of white friends. You know, well, not lots. It's also dwindled over the years because some I just can't, you know, can't, right? But my opinion is all white people are racist, not because they're bad people, but because white supremacy is in everything and it's in everybody. But my question, so I will not entertain anymore the question about who is racist, because that doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is who wants to reach the shore, right? So, and I feel like that's also what some of the things we have to ask ourselves, because at the end of the day, none of us are unproblematic because we live in this world,
Right.
right? So no matter how much work you're doing or how much work I've done, there's still places where I am problematic. Mm-hmm. But it's like we were saying, you can't blame somebody for not knowing, but you can be all like, so you don't want to know, you know? I mean, right? You know, right? You know. So I feel like that's how we, as a people, maybe move this mountain, right? Is that we like also we need to be just as committed to healing ourselves as we are into like fighting, right? Being out in the street or anything else, right? And we also, like I said, have to realize it's all of us or none of us. For reals. We don't get there leaving people behind. Because when we do, the problems will just keep coming. You know, sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for cutting you off. I came to that realization this summer. And I think if you had asked me a year or two ago, like all of us or none of us, I was like, well, some motherfuckers ain't ready. Like, you know, in my mind, in my, you know, my attitude. What do you say to the folks who are like, you know what? Not everyone's gonna make it. Like there's people whose transphobia is literally killing Black trans women. There's people who's participating in the church is facilitating for homophobia to exist. You know, men beating women and killing children, and you know, what do you say to those who are like, you know what, not everyone's gonna make it? What do we say to those folks?
Well, the thing is like, we also have to talk about when we, you know, think about what we mean when we say make it, right? If there's, I mean, because my feeling is the idea is not to like have every single person be unproblematic, right? That's never gonna happen. But when I say it's all of us or none of us, what I mean is there has to be space. And you know, I'm not religious, but I believe in redemption. And I believe that that part of like why a lot of people, like it seems like we can't bring them along, is because there's so many of us who has untreated trauma. You know, there's some of us who are like not dealing with our internalized racism. There's some of us not realizing that capitalism is a trap. So we think we have a stake in it. So a lot of these like people, like people who are transphobic, they're not just transphobic because like, oh, you know, there's stuff around that, right? For one, it's a lack of imagination of what things could be. And to tell you the truth, that's why I do this dream practice, because part of my dream practice and what I'm trying to hold space for is people expanding their ideas of what's possible, what's needed, what's necessary, right? So what we can't just be all like, no, I ain't gonna deal with these people. Because we do need most of us to come along in one way or the other, right? And even if it's just about like the political decisions we make. But we also, like I said, we have to hold out the possibility of redemption. We have to hold out the possibility that there's a lot of hurt people out here. And hurt people, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know that's like all cliches, but it's true.
Yeah. It manifests.
So
It's energy transference, repetitive cycles.
Right, exactly. And so I don't have an answer about like how we get like everybody on board.
Yeah.
But I guess, you know, for me, the thing is, let's get as many people on board as possible. And then one day it'll seem kooky to not jump on board, right? Right? And it'll be like, and you'll see, and people will see the harm they do themselves by insisting on, you know, running in front or behind the car instead of just jumping in, you know, you know.
Right.
My hope and my dream is that one day being misogynist and transphobic will seem futile.
Yeah. And I think it's possible.
I hope so. I mean, I don't know if it's going to happen in my lifetime, but I hope so. And my hope is that I can do some things to add to that body of possibility.
Thank you so much, Crystal, for your knowledge and your love. I feel so full right now.
Oh.
I feel so full and so grateful in this moment.
Well, thank you so much. And like I said, you know, I love this project. And when I read about it, you know, I read about a lot of things and sometimes I think, oh, I want to do it and I just forget, you know, you know, really. I mean, but this was like, I kind of saw it and I was like, let me fill this out right now before I forget, you know.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And you know, if you know any folks who may be interested, you know, send them my way. I would love.
I will.
You know, my goal in life is to talk to as many people as possible. You know, so thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And like I said, you know, thanks for like including me. I appreciate that.
Yeah. All righty. I will send you all the information, or our video and our audio in the near future. But you know, don't hesitate to reach out. I really appreciate that I connected with you.
Yeah, well, thank you. And good luck with this project. And like, you know, I have a couple of people in mind already that I would like to point you to, or so like, you know, we'll make that happen.
Awesome. Thank you, Crystal.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
All right. Same to you.